All right, yes. Like Madeline said, I am from Greenland, actually an island off the coast of Greenland, to be even more remote, way, way up there, northern part of Greenland. This is me, over 50 years ago, so it's not just 25 years of PHP, this is the full 50 you're getting. More me in Greenland. My whole family in Greenland on our dog sled. Our house. The view in the summertime. And me getting technical. This was a crazy place to live. But fast forward another 20-some years. My first computer, Timex Sinclair, had 1K of memory. Absolute craziness when you think about the devices we have today. The normal progression, Hayes modems. For half of you in the audience, you've probably never used a modem like this. I see a few older folks who definitely have. Sitting there staring at Z modem all day, waiting for all your downloads to download. This was the internet for me when I was many of your ages in the audience. In the 90s, we still didn't have the web. The closest we had was Gopher. And I worked a little bit with Gopher. It was basically hypertext or linked text documents with a text-based browser, mostly used in universities. But the whole world changed when Mosaic came out in 1993, which is when my 25-year journey began. As soon as I saw Mosaic, I knew the world was going to change, and change drastically. I started writing web applications. They look like this. CGI, scripts written in C, with HTML inside the C program. This was not a very nice way of solving the web problem. Most people moved on from C and started using CGI PM. This was a Perl module for writing CGI applications. I still didn't like it. This was simply writing HTML in another language now. I wanted my HTML to look like HTML. I wanted it to look more like that. I wanted to separate the business logic from the templating on the front end look and feel of my dynamic web applications. Behind the scenes, what I was trying to do, which turned out to be a complete failure, was to introduce a C API for the web. And I thought this was a great idea, because every time I started to build a new web application, I was writing all this boilerplate code. So I took all these things like parsing cookies, parsing posts, sending cookies, doing all the HTTP-related things, and also communicating with Apache, the web server at the time. All those things were the same in every project. So I abstracted that away, and I just gave a very, very simple stack-based C API for the web. So if you wanted to add another tag to your templating system, you could do it like this. So this was a cosine example. Pop the argument off the stack, do whatever your function does, in this case called the cosine function, and then pop the return value back onto the stack. And now suddenly you had this cos function that you could use in your PHP templates. And my whole thing was for people to write their business logic in a strictly typed, compiled language like C or C++, and then surface it within the templating system that I wrote for them. A very, very simple templating system. But this whole idea didn't work at all. Nobody wanted to write C code. Everybody just wanted to use the templating system that I had given them. And it drove me crazy for years. People would complain about things that they couldn't do in the templating system. For example, someone wrote me one time, why can't I call my function from within my function in PHP? Like, well, that's recursion. Why would you need recursion in a templating system? And they came up with some big complicated reason for why they needed recursion. I looked up my state machines, like, okay, I can implement that, fine. Now you have recursion in your templating system. I think it was 3 days later, I got another email saying, help, how do I stop it? Because there weren't any statically typed variables or anything like that. There was absolutely no way to end the recursion. But they didn't ask for that. They wanted recursion. I gave them recursion. Lots and lots of recursion. But the point was that PHP started its life as a templating system, as a very restricted, limited templating system, where the idea was that you were supposed to write your business logic and expose it via PHP, not write your business logic in PHP. And that just didn't work because nobody wanted to do that. The web was moving too fast. There weren't enough C developers in the world to meet the need. And everyone started writing their business logic in PHP itself. And PHP has received a lot of criticism over the years, most of it based on the fact that this is actually, it started life as a templating system. And it took us a while to change direction. It took me a while to change direction and to focus on the templating system itself as a language. I refused to call it a language for the first 5-7 years of its life. It wasn't. It was a templating system. What I worked a lot on, however, was the ecosystem around it. There's absolutely no point in having a very pretty programming language if it can't talk to anything. And if it doesn't cooperate and live within the whole ecosystem of things. And you need 4 things. You need an operating system, you need a web server, you need a language to write your logic in, and you need some kind of data store behind the scenes. And this is where LAMP came from. It wasn't an accident. We made sure that all the pieces fit well together. I spent a lot of time writing the Apache module for PHP, mod PHP, so that PHP and Apache were so intertwined you couldn't even tell them apart anymore. PHP sits inside Apache and is an integral part of Apache. On the database side, back then the database I was using was called MiniSQL. And this was before MySQL existed. And because I didn't have the money to buy Oracle, and I didn't need it for most of my web applications, I just needed a simple database. And MiniSQL was great for that. But it didn't have cursors. It had no way of restricting the amount of data you got back when you did a select star. So if you were unlucky and you hit a table with 100,000 rows, select star, you were waiting a long time for that result to come across the wire. And if you only needed the first 10, it kind of sucked. So that's where I added the limit clause to MiniSQL. And we still have the limit clause today. This limit clause has now sort of percolated up into other databases because it's just super useful. But coming up with the limit clause was part of building this web ecosystem where we live, where we write our business logic. Much more than just the language itself. The entire ecosystem has to work well. I also spent a lot of time trying to simplify things and trying to make PHP as accessible as I possibly could. I worked for IBM for a while, and I was actually on the WebSphere team. And if any of you have ever used WebSphere, man, that thing was complicated. I remember trying to write my first WebSphere application, and I asked for the documentation, expecting like maybe a small text file or something, but they came with this whole bookshelf, rolling bookshelf of books. Here's the documentation for WebSphere. And just getting a Hello World application up and running in WebSphere was really, really hard. And it shouldn't be. Hello World in PHP. Open up whatever text editor you want, type Hello World, save. What else could it possibly do than spit out Hello World? Right? It's the world's shortest Hello World program. And the text file just containing the 2 words Hello World is a perfectly valid PHP program. Because PHP is modal. When you don't pop into PHP mode, everything gets output. But it's a perfectly valid program. You don't have to do echo Hello World. You can just put Hello World in a text file. And that's part of this idea of making it accessible and scaling it down. It's amazingly powerful when the first thing you try, when you're trying some new technology, if it just works. And it's super, super motivating. You try something, it works, and it's like, whoa, that worked. What else can this thing do? This is fun, right? PHP is amazingly good at running crap code. And yeah, it sounds a little funny, but it is super important that it does something other than give you 3 pages of stack traces when you do something that isn't quite right. It should do something. It should do something useful. It shouldn't tell you over and over again, you're stupid, you're stupid, you're stupid, like most Java errors do. You just pages and pages and pages of crap that doesn't mean anything to the person who made the mistake. And if you think about the web as it is today and how it has grown over the years, the fact that there was an accessible tool where anybody with a good idea could put their idea online has made the web a much, much better place. If only geeks like me were allowed to program the web would suck. Because I'm pretty boring. And most developers are pretty boring people. We like bits and bytes. We like crazy things that normal people really find not interesting and annoying most of the time. So the fact that it's accessible and it runs crap code really well is super, super important. So over the years, we focused a lot on performance, especially lately. Robustness has always been a thing as well. It's fine that it's easy to use, but if it crashes all the time, it's not useful either. I always avoided going multi-threaded. One request, one process, no shared state. That also means it scales infinitely because it's this perfect sandbox where everything is created and torn down in one request. There's no server-side variables or anything like that that you need to maintain state, so you can just throw more servers at a problem, and it just works well. So this perfect sandbox model in 2019 language we call serverless. This was serverless before we have ever thought of the word serverless. Get lots of questions over the years about lots of stuff. Naming inconsistencies in PHP. PHP is perfectly consistent, just not in the way you expect. Most people, when they look at consistency in a language, they look horizontally across the language. Do the Oracle functions look like the MySQL functions? No. PHP is vertically consistent. If you know the Oracle API called OCI 8, those Oracle functions in PHP are going to be very, very, very familiar to you. PHP is a very thin wrapper on top of hundreds of underlying libraries, and it mimics those underlying API libraries that they wrap. So vertically, every single function in PHP is perfectly consistent with the underlying library function that they implement. It looks inconsistent horizontally because the libraries are not consistent. If I had taken the time to make it horizontally consistent, I'd still be working on it. There were just too many libraries to implement, and there were also many people doing it. It wasn't me. Lots of people doing it, and coordinating everyone to force them into the same API would have slowed us down way too much. Oops. People always complain about needle haystack inconsistencies. Do you realize that every string function in PHP is haystack needle, and every array function is needle haystack? It's not completely random. It is consistent within the string functions and within the array functions. All right. So, for the past 10 years or so, a benchmark against WordPress 4.9.8, we have gotten quite a bit faster every single version, with a huge jump from PHP 5 to PHP 7. PHP today, if you use PHP 7.3 or the upcoming 7.4, is a really, really, really fast scripting language. Faster than any other scripting language out there. And we spent a long time in the past 5 years getting to that. In the PHP 5 days, we weren't that fast. We were in line with existing scripting languages at that point. But in the last 5 years, it's really, really changed. Also, the memory usage. In 2009, PHP 5.3 on WordPress would need about 140 megabytes to serve up the WordPress front page. Today, we need 15 megabytes. So if there's anyone in the audience still running any version of PHP 5, you're kind of lucky, because you have this massive performance and memory boost sitting there waiting for you. And the upgrade is really easy. And if running on AWS or somewhere, you can turn off 2/3 of your instances once you upgrade, which the people who pay the bill will be quite happy for. And my son will be quite happy for the less carbon dioxide that you'll be spitting out into the atmosphere by running more efficient code. Also, PHP 5 is completely unsupported these days. If you find a security problem in PHP 5, if you find any kind of bug, I'm not going to fix it. You're completely on your own. So please upgrade. If you find a problem in PHP 7.2 or 7.3, we'll fix it for you. For free. So, but there are no bugs, only features in PHP. So PHP 7.4, this is the new version coming out this year. There are a few new things in it. Type properties. So class properties can now have a type. It's a slight performance hit, but we're hoping Dmitry, our superstar Russian hacker in St. Petersburg, will find other ways of speeding things up so that you won't notice the slight performance impact that this has. Arrow functions. This is a short form for closures. So these two are identical. You can see we use auto capture here from the immediate outside scope. Serialization of objects has been a nuisance in PHP for a very long time. It's been semi-broken as well. The serialized and unserialized magic functions coming in 7.4 are one step towards addressing that and making it a little bit easier to serialize and unserialize objects in PHP. We'll see how that goes. But it should address most of the issues that people have currently with object serialization. There's a new operator, question mark equals. It's the same as this line here. It's just an assignment version of the null coalescing operator. We're also introducing weak references. Weak references were available as a PECL extension up until now, but it was kind of broken and old. Now we have full weak references in PHP. And a weak reference is a reference that doesn't count towards the reference counting. So PHP is a reference counted language. When you create an object, for example, and then you say A equals new thing, and then you say $B equals A. Now you have two references to this object, $A and $B. When both $A and $B go out of scope, the reference count drops to 0 and the object is destroyed. Now, in some systems, you might have some kind of cache, like an ORM might have an object cache, for example. So even when you eliminate $A and $B, the cache reference will keep that object alive, which isn't necessarily what you want. Once all references to an object has gone away, you might actually want to get rid of the object. So with a weak reference, your cache system could say, I want a weak reference to this object, which means that it won't count. Once the real references have gone away, the object will be deleted, even though there is a cache reference to it, because that reference is weak. It doesn't count. So for cache systems, weak references are kind of interesting. Another super cool new feature is something we call opcache preloading. It means that at server startup, you can load PHP code. And those classes or those functions defined in the preloaded code will appear as if it's part of native PHP. So you could, for example, take your entire framework, like Laravel, and preload it. And by preloading, it means that the entire Laravel framework is available to every request, and performance-wise, it'll be a little bit quicker than not preloading it and loading it per request. Now, the opcache already stores Laravel opcached in shared memory, so the performance benefit isn't huge. It's small. It's 5 to 10%, which still is important. However, preloading is really important for this next bit. FFI. FFI is the foreign function interface, and you've seen that in other languages. Java has it, and other scripting languages have it as well. And we've had it for a while as a hacky extension, but now in PHP 7.4, it's coming in as a full language feature. And it's a little scary because it can really screw up the server. This allows you to write C code that gets compiled right from your HTML or right from your PHP application. So a very simple example, you can bring in libc and basically call printf in libc directly from your PHP script, which is okay, but it's not super interesting. I did another example. I went on GitHub and I found this GIF-enc library. This is a GIF encoding library for doing animated GIFs. And here I create an unsigned int 8 type, an array of unsigned int 8s because the library needed that. And I do FFI load the header file. This FFI load creates this FFI object that basically compiles the C code and links in the library. This step takes a little while. This is why for FFI, you need the preloading. So by preloading this FFI script, it means you're basically on Apache or Nginx or FPM startup, you're compiling all your FFIs and making it part of PHP. In the not too distant future, I can see a lot of simple PHP extensions moving completely out of C and into PHP FFI. so that you can compose or install MySQL extension, for example. Well, the MySQL extension might be slightly too complex, but many simple wrapper extensions will be simple composer PHP scripts that will run just as fast as they do today in pure C, because they will still be pure C, but all the data management in the extension will be written in PHP. So it'll also be more accessible to more people to work on this extension code. So the combination of opcat preloading and FFI is going to change the PHP landscape, I think, in the next 5 years. But we'll see. We'll see if I'm right. So for this particular example, all I had to do in the header file was add these 2 lines. You give it a scope, basically you give it a name, and you tell it what's the name of the shared library that this header file applies to. And you feed that to FFI load, and that's all you need. Now you have an FFI law object where you can call methods that are directly in this shared library. And the output is that. Not super exciting, but this part is kind of exciting to me. Also because if you think back to the beginning of the PHP project, what was I trying to do? I was trying to get people to write C code, right? Full circle. All right. These 25 years of PHP has also included me having a kid. This is me some 17 years ago with Carl, my son. He used to come to conferences with me. This was in Karlsruhe many years ago. He loved running around the exhibit hall, and his great skill was finding the off switch for anything. Any server he could find, anything he could find, he would go in, he would turn it off. And he would systematically circle the entire exhibit hall and turn everything off. And people really didn't like that, but they knew it was my son, and he had his PHP shirt on with his cute blonde hair. They couldn't really do anything. But he would do the lap again and again. Yeah. Today he's playing video games in his Tesla. It's a very, very different life now. It's amazing how fast they grow up. Some other highlights for the 25 years. I used to go to Australia every year for the Linux conference down there. This is Tridge arguing with Linus over some point. Tridge wrote rsync, Samba, a bunch of things. Linus is Linus, obviously, right? This was another fun moment in my 25 years. This was me going to some conference in India. I don't own a suit like that. So, the organizers in India figured out this is a serious conference with serious speakers. This guy sent us a picture of him in a t-shirt, what the hell? So they photoshopped a suit on top of my t-shirt. And the first thing I see when I arrive in this city are these huge signboards everywhere of me in a suit looking very uncomfortable. Another highlight. Anyone recognize the person sitting here? A hint, this was in Sri Lanka in 2003, I think, or 2004. Very famous science fiction author who lived in Sri Lanka since the 50s. Arthur C. Clarke. This was probably the highlight for me, because I'm a big Arthur C. Clarke fan. Space Odyssey, 2001, etc. Teaching Arthur C. Clarke PHP was awesome. He was sitting in the front row, paying attention, asking intelligent questions. Really, really cool. But Something even cooler came out of this Sri Lanka conference. One of the reasons that I'm still doing this today, 25 years later, is because of projects like this. This project is called Sahana. This is a couple of kids in Sri Lanka right after the big tsunami that had wiped out some coastal cities in their country. They wanted to do something. And I talked to them, and they were distraught because they had family members who had died. And for reasons that had nothing to do with the tsunami, really, it was all logistics and foreign aid not getting to the people who needed the aid. And we chatted a bit about it, and they had this idea of fixing this problem, of writing basically a disaster relief management system in a box that could be quickly deployed in case of a disaster anywhere in the world. And they built it. And it's now been used in over 50 disasters all over the world. And it has things like a people finder, and there's a mobile app for it now as well. So when a relief worker finds a person, or when they rescue someone, they ask them their name, they type in the app the name of the person, and where they put them, like shelter number 3. And then people looking for their grandmother can type in their grandmother's name and very quickly see, oh, she's been found, she's in shelter number 3. Same kind of things for foreign aid that gets delivered to the airport. Someone is there with the mobile app saying, okay, we have blankets, or we have clean water in warehouse 4, right? And when someone needs clean water, they type it in, going, whoa, where can we find it? Okay, we know it's in warehouse 4, right? Very, very, very simple stuff. But many, many countries in the world don't have a system like that that's easily available when something terrible happens. And this project has received a lot of recognition over the years for what it has done for the world, basically. And I love this quote from the Secretary of National Defense of the Philippines. Like, no innovation matters more than that which saves lives. And it also reminds us a little bit of why we're doing this stuff. This stuff is just a tool. Development is a tool to solve real problems in the world. It doesn't matter that much. PHP doesn't matter that much. The tool doesn't matter. It's what we solve. It's what we do with the tool. PHP is just a hammer. It's irrelevant. All the tools are hammers. In and of themselves, they're irrelevant. What we do with them is super, super important. So my plea to people is, please work on things that matter. Perhaps only to you, that's fine. If you don't work on things that matter, you're going to burn out. You're not going to be programming for the next 25 years of your life if the thing you're working on is completely insignificant to the world. At some point, you're going to wake up and say, what the hell am I doing? So, I see 3 types of people in our development world. I see the dreamers. I get probably once a month, some Silicon Valley person has a great idea, and he said, all I need is a technical co-founder, and we can rule the world. What he means is he needs someone to do all the work, right? He has some harebrained idea that may not work at all because he has no technical basis at all. Dreams like that are kind of useless, right? I would love a plane that's 10 times faster so it doesn't take me 11 hours to fly from California to Germany. But I want to survive the trip. So the person who comes up with this plane that's 10 times faster better know a little bit about physics, right? You need a basis in reality for your dreams. On the other edge of the spectrum, we have the coder, who just loves to code. Doesn't matter what. Couldn't care less what they're coding, as long as it's cool code, and the tool is cool. And they have 37,000 lines in their vimrc file for all the weird macros they have for doing cool things with Vim. And that's what's important to them, and that's what they talk to each other about. They talk to their friends about their Vim macros, or Emacs macros, whatever. I'll never understand that part of geekdom. What I talk to my friends about are the things I've solved, are the problems I'm working on. They don't care which editor I used. Certainly the end users of your applications don't give a crap which editor you used and which language you used to solve the problem. As long as when they click buy in the application and their socks arrive the next day, they're happy. And what I talk to my friends about are projects like I work for Etsy, which is basically a shopping cart, but it's for artists and makers to sell their things. And what I talk to my friends about is going to Mexico and helping bring Etsy to rural Mexico so that the people making pots and selling them to a middleman for $1 a pot, and that middleman then sells that pot at the Mexico City airport for $400. I tell my friends, I helped this potter cut out the middleman and sell directly to rich Germans for $300 a pot versus $1 a pot this artist got before. Changed their entire life and changed the economy of an entire village. To me, that's what matters, right? Make an impact. Yes, you're good with your tool. It's great that you have fun with your tool, but never, ever, ever lose sight of why we're doing this. And yes, I'm squarely here. So, if it wasn't obvious, I sort of advocate people try to drift to the middle, have a bit of both. Dream a bit. If you're a hardcore coder, get out in the world, see the world a little bit. Leave your Vim macros for at least 30 minutes a day and look at the world. And if you're a hardcore dreamer, learn to code. It's really, really easy to learn to be a crappy programmer. There are so many resources everywhere that'll teach you terrible things that'll give you just enough to at least know what's possible, to know what's easy and what's hard and what's impossible. So that when you do go and talk to your crazy whys, you can speak the same language. All right.